Welcome to another episode of London Lights. Today, my guest on London Lights is Nick Panaseiko, the man described by a Niagara Falls radio station as Canada's #1 promo man. Nick is a Londoner, well known on the London music scene in the 1960s and 1970s and beyond. Ronnie Hawkins once dubbed him just slightly ahead of his time. He was a music promo man second to none. He opened a club in London called The Image. He opened a restaurant called Wong's, and he did stints with Decca Records, Polydor, Warner's, and Word Records. Nick, welcome to the program. You're definitely a London legend.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity of being part of your quest to put the spotlight on Londoners.
Yeah, it's a pleasure having you. So, as you speak about your involvement in London in the 1960s and 70s, I think viewers will get a different picture of London than we have now. They'll see a London that's almost as hip and swinging as its British namesake back in the 60s. Carnaby and Flower Power and all that stuff. So, Nick, you were a promoter, and unlike me, who just sit in front of pictures of rock stars, you actually rub shoulders with them.
Well,
How did you get into that crazy business of music promotion and deal with some of the greatest acts of all time?
well, it was a job like anything else. Everybody always makes comments on how great it would be to do what you were doing, but the reality, it was a job. Somebody had to do it, and public relations and promotion was key in anybody's success. But back in the 60s, unfortunately, we lacked managers. We had booking agents, but no managers. So I started managing the local groups in town and realized that if I'm going to manage a group, I might as well start promoting them. And so I went into doing my own dances and concerts at the time.
Okay, now on this picture behind me, of course, is the one and only Mick Jagger. And the other fellow, looking like a young Elton John or something, is actually you, right?
That's me, actually. I think Elton picked up my style of glasses because I think I think I led the way in being creative and trying to stand out.
Did you actually meet up with Elton John at some point?
I met Elton for about 2 seconds backstage at Massey Hall. He came in to see Gino Vanelli, and it was kind of a brief rub shoulders. He was in and out, and of course, Elton recorded for another record company, so we didn't really get that close.
Okay. So tell me, you went to high school in London, Beale, right?
No, I originally started out at Weeble and
Okay.
did my last 2 years at Central. Unfortunately, got expelled in my last year, grade 13, and that led to my job with Decca Records in 1967.
Okay, so you're a high schooler, went to high school in London, just like most of us did, and you get expelled, and now you got to find something to do. What's your first promo gig?
Well, my first promo gig, actually, in those days, even with Decca Records, we were more salesmen than promo men. So Decca Records, I had the opportunity of doing Gordon Lightfoot, and at that time, the first Canadian group that made any noise was a group called Lords of London.
Well, tell me about Gene Pitney. I know that was your first concert you put on, and things didn't go so well. What happened?
Uh, that was 1964. I teamed up with a major booking agent called Ron Scribner out of Toronto, and I was looking for a group called, at that time, Richie Knight and the Midnights. They had a hit called Charlena, and I finally got a hold of Ron Scribner, and Ron said, well, Richie Knight can't make it because they've got too many gigs in the Toronto market, but I've got Gene Pitney, who at that time had the man who shot Liberty Valance 24 hours from Tulsa available. So we ended up booking him for December the 22nd. And a day and a half before the show, I get a walk into the Bluebird record shop, and Fred Smith, who ran the store at the time, said, they've been looking for you. And we find out that Gene Pitney has canceled the show because he got a better deal somewhere else in a larger venue because of the #1 records that he had. So
Wow, talk about a trial by fire. So here's your first concert, and your main act cancels out on you. What did you do?
Well, we had the meeting with the Lennon Arena and the McManus brothers. We had to bring in a group called the Supremes, who were from Detroit and just started to make it on the charts with "Stop in the Name of Love."
You mean
So
the Supremes? The Supremes.
the original Supremes. So we bring them in. They drive in from Detroit. We had a snowstorm. It took them 6 hours to get here from Detroit. When they arrive, their manager comes up to me and hands me a stack of music charts. I take him over to the backup band that I hired, and the band leader says, "Well, nobody in the group reads charts." So now we've got a major act and we've got a group, but nobody can put it together. So it ended up that the Supremes end up lip singing to their album that night. So that was way before Minnie Vanelli or anybody else. I think the Supremes were the first ones to lip sync.
Wow. So now you said they played London Arena. That was a big place to play in the day, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a great venue located at Bathurst Street, Bathurst and Rideout. And it was your typical hardwood floors, bleacher style arena, but beautiful sound.
Okay, so now you've done your first show. You've got it out of the way. Did you make any money?
I think we broke even on that one because, like I say, it was a major snowstorm. It had to be, and it was cold, and it was around January the 10th or so of the date.
Okay. So what happened next? Did this turn you off of the business, or did it make you more enthused, or what did you do?
Well, I end up, as I say, going out promoting my local bands, and we would take the bands like the London Set, David Lee King and the Apostles, and the Fortune Tellers, the three groups that I managed. We do shows in London at the Optimist Center, or I also took the groups to small towns like Zurich and Exeter because they were treated like stars there.
You're working in downtown London, you're promoting musical acts, you're traveling around the area with bands. What was downtown London like back in the day?
Well, in the day, Wellington Square was Canada's first indoor mall, and I was the assistant manager of the disc shop, which was the record store there. And everybody congregated in the mall. The mall at that time and the record store was like your computer, the Google of that day. If you wanted to know any entertainment info, you checked the disc shop out or the Bluebird record store on Dundas Street, and we'd give you the update of what the entertainment was. The big problem back in those years was the fact that drinking age was 21, and everybody that was 16 going on 19 thought that they should be able to get into establishments. But unfortunately, Lennon had what they called the morality squad, and they used to go into nightclubs and raid the places and charge you for drinking underage, and you'd be paying a $60 fine. But London had its unique sound. We had the Carnaby groups, like the London Set. We had Fortune Tellers were like the Rolling Stones, and we had David Lee King and the Apostles that were like Wilson Pickett. So we had a very thriving palette of entertainment.
And you bring in Toronto acts as well, didn't you? You dealt with
Well,
David Lee Thomas and people like that.
I brought in David Clayton Thomas and the Rogues in 1966, and that pretty well introduced what they call the Toronto sound to London. Out of that came George Oliver. We used to come back regularly with George Oliver and his children, and we had a lot of Toronto acts come in. Sean and Jay Jackson and the Majestics. London was well suited because we were stuck between Toronto and Detroit, so we had a lot of acts to draw from.
Yeah, I misstated the name there. It's David Clayton Thomas. And of course, he went on to be the great singer for Blood, Sweat, and Tears, correct?
Right. He did the big song Spinning Wheel, What Goes Up Must Come Down.
Right. So, of course, you're now in the age, today we have Google, we have texting, we have all these technical uh, things that help us to get the word out. But what did you do to be a successful manager back in the 60s before we had all these gizmos?
Well, we created a magazine called the Soul Sauce, and Soul Sauce was reprints of a lot of articles out of a trade paper called Billboard Magazine, but it also put a spotlight on my next event. And we would drop off these bundles of Soul Sauce the uh, in the lunchrooms at all the high schools, knowing that they'd get circulated around, and that pretty well was the beginning of advertising. And then, of course, we try to align ourselves with local DJs from CFPL Radio, Dick Williams, or Paul Ski from CHLO, because in those days, disc jockeys could draw as many people as the opening act.
Wow. Hey, I know you rub shoulders with some of the greats, and I want to talk to you about all of those names. We'll just drop some names and you can tell us some stories, but we do have to take a commercial break. So hang on, viewers. We're going to get to the good stuff here in a moment. We'll just take this short break and we'll be back with Nick Panaseiko. Okay, now we're back with Nick Panaseiko here on London Lights, Canada's #1 promo man, according to a radio station in Niagara Falls. You were also thought of quite highly by Ronnie Hawkins. I'm going to drop some names here, Nick, and you're going to tell us some stories of some of the big acts that you've dealt with. Let's start with Ronnie Hawkins.
Well, with the hockey, like I said, in those days, the hockey used to play the pump room at the Brass Rail in London, which was located in East London, just east of Adelaide. And I got to know Ronnie by hanging out with the band. And what you did was you try to be there when the band was loading in so that the bouncers would recognize you as being part of the band, because it was pretty rough trying to get in to catch any of these groups. And Ronnie, of course, used to pack the Brass Rails, so I would get in by being part of the group as such.
Now,
Actually, the first,
when you say his band, we're talking about the band, right? This is the Hawks.
most of the players were the band, with Lee Von Hellman, Robbie Robertson. At that time, Garth Hudson hadn't joined, but yeah, it was definitely the nucleus of the band.
And they would stay they perform at the Brass Rail and then stay at the embassy across the road, didn't they?
Well, they used to stay either at the embassy or sometimes they stayed at the Golden Pheasant Motel, which was up out on Highway 22, up on Richmond Street.
Interesting. Now, I want to talk about this photo behind me. I know that the Stones played the Gardens. Did you have anything to do with that 13-minute legendary concert that got stopped short and dead in its tracks by the police? What do you know about them?
Well, I was there that day because we sold tickets at the disc shop. The show was being presented by Pat Quinn, who was the manager of a big department store in London called Save Vets at the time, which was located at White Oaks. And what ended up happening was there was some damage done to the doors and by the kids pushing in to get in to see the Stones, that the box office was withholding the balance of the money. So consequently, the management realized they weren't going to get paid, and it was a combination between the OPP and the management. They ended up pulling the plug on the Stones, and of course, Mick Jagger promised to be back to London for a free concert. I raised the issue with Mick, but he didn't recall making any promises. Years later.
So it was management. It wasn't the police. I apologize to all our fine fellows in blue.
Well, I like I say, I think it was a little bit of a combination, but it was more the management than the police.
All right. So I know Alice Cooper started out as a Detroit boy, and I understand he and the band really enjoyed being in London.
Yes, they actually enjoyed being at Wonderland, and they would stay at Wonderland for a week to 10 days at that time rehearsing. So Don Jones and Chuck Jones, who ran Wonderland, were the ones who started bringing in people like Zappa and Pop Festival type of groups.
Is it true that Zappa and Alice Cooper actually went water skiing on the Thames River?
Well, that's a myth, I think, but I know I wasn't there to witness it, so I'm not sure who started the myth or the story. But that it's become legendary.
So Alice Cooper's band loved to be in London, correct?
Right, very much so.
And what was it about London that would attract these guys from Detroit to enjoy sleepy old London?
Well, it was a place to rehearse, and it was cheap to stay. Of course, the American dollar was still had more value than the Canadian one. So they found a niche at Wonderland, and that's where Alice developed the show.
Wow. Including cutting the heads off chickens?
Well, that was another story too. I mean, the beautiful thing about anything with rock and roll, if something zany or crazy happens, everybody continues embellishing it to the point where it just becomes part of the package.
You were quite successful in what you did as a promo man, as a manager, as a concert promoter. Just a quick question. People are not successful usually by coincidence. Usually they have some good, strong core values. What were some of yours that made you a success?
Well, I treated everybody as a star, and I always expected them to treat me in the same package. It took a group of us to put things together. It took the act, and it took the promotion, it took the radio station. So in the industry, we all respected each other with the same amount of respect that you deserved, whether you're the entertainer, or whether you're the promoter, or you did the window display, for instance.
And I think you told me that meant that the band always got paid first.
Well, usually that was the going concern, because with a lot of dances at that time, not everyone was successful. So there's always a good faith. If you end up not having enough money to pay the band, you always knew that you owed, and of course you settled up at some point.
Okay. Now let me drop a couple more names on you. John Lennon and the Beatles. Did you ever run into any of them?
No, I was on my way to see John Lennon at Ronnie Hawkins' farm in Stouffville, and once again, a major snowstorm kept me from teaming up with Lennon before Hawkins left to go down east to do a major tour.
Oh, the joys of working in Canada, I guess, Nick.
Well, especially London, Ontario, and the snowfalls that we used to get. If you recall, there used to be 6-foot snowbanks at some point.
Hmm. Now, I understand that you had some part in the discovery of Shania Twain.
Well, the resort in Huntsville, Deerhurst Inn, was being sold, and we brought in. I had a contract with Deerhurst at that time. My contract was coming up for renewal, but in the meantime, they're negotiating to sell the resort. So we gave this girl, Eileen Twain, an opportunity to audition, and she totally impressed the management and the rest of the committee that decided who was going to entertain at Deerhurst. And so we gave Eileen the opportunity. She had one killer song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow and Somewhere Out There. So she had about 7 minutes in the show, but it gave her a showcase of her talent. And that's when a lawyer from Nashville came up, saw the talent, and decided to sign her to Mercury Records.
Awesome. Hey, I don't want to forget Kiss, legendary rock band, came to London a few times. You brought them here, right? Tell me about that.
I was the first one to bring Kiss in 1974. I was doing promotion for a radio station called CJOM-FM in Windsor that beamed into London and into Detroit, along with a DJ called Ronnie Hawkins. And we went out looking for kind of a mascot for CJOM. We had an opportunity to look at the New York Dolls and Aerosmith, and Kiss was the most outrageous one. So we went with Kiss, brought them in 1974 for the first concert with the Rush opening, and that featured the original drummer John Rutsey, who unfortunately passed away a few months later. And we end up bringing them back in December, where I hired 4 kids, dressed them up as Kiss, got a limousine and a photographer, and we did a quick in and out of record stores and radio stations with the Kiss imposters, setting the theme that Kiss was in town a week before the concert. So we created a buzz the week before, and of course, the concert did well. Unfortunately, once again, snowstorm group arrives late. One of the roadies gets busted at the border. We end up having to let the kids into the Lennon Arena because it was freezing rain outside, and had a confrontation with Kiss's management because they wanted us to clear the house so they could do a sound check. And we said, no way, the show's going to go on the way you put it on.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you've had a lot of tricks up your sleeve that you've used from time to time when you were promoting.
Well, yeah, the show must go on. It's showtime.
Well, it seems like you were right in your element with a lot of this. Any more great stories you can tell us about some of the bands you promoted and worked with?
Well, one of my, when I worked for the record companies, especially for Quality Records and which was Warner, Elektra, and Atlantic Music of Canada, we had to always try to come up with an innovative way to bring a spotlight to a group. So with Queen, I did a stint outside of Records on Wheels. They had Fat Bottom Girls out at that time from their jazz album. So I hired 2 strippers from the Zanzibar just up the street.
I want you to just tell me quickly about this photo behind me. I thought maybe at first this was you with Mick Jagger at the Gardens, but you indicated no. This was in Toronto after Keith Richards got busted.
That shot was taken actually in Oshawa at the concert that Keith Richards, who was sentenced to, the judge sentenced him to doing a free concert for the blind. And right behind me is Cliff Lormer, who was the MC for the show, along with John Belushi. And of course, at that time, Ronnie Wood and Keith Richards, they had a group called the Barbarians. So Keith was a guest star as opposed to be part of the Rolling Stones.
Oh, and Mick Jagger, did he sing and perform that night?
Mick Jagger did. As I say, he was the guest star.
Now, you've been hired by different record companies, including, to my amazement, Word Records, which is mostly a gospel type record label. Did they not know your reputation for some of this wild and zany stuff you'd done?
Well, actually, I think that's what brought it to the attention. They're aware of what I did in promotion, and I had a meeting with the president of Word and told him that the big issue with Word Records and other Christian labels were that they're only being distributed in mom and pop record stores, and consequently, everybody didn't get the opportunity to use a Visa card or whatever. So I sold them on the package deal where I would get them into Sam the Record Man chain and A&A's with a sample package of about 10 artists who were, before you'd go into a record store and you'd only find Mahalia Jackson and some choirs.
And you were promoting people like Amy Grant, who became huge stars in their own right.
Actually, Amy was my first major promotion, and we did a sellout concert with her at Massey Hall.
Well, you are a London legend, Nick. It's been great to have you on the show. Obviously, you're getting up there in age. Are you looking at retirement, or are you still going full bore?
No, I think I'm retired, and I had the honor of being inducted into the London Music Hall of Fame with the Lifetime Achievement Award. So I think I paid my dues, and unfortunately, I couldn't keep up with Google and all the rest of this, Spotify, all the other music programming. What hurts me the most in this industry is that the loyalty with the fan base isn't as strong as it used to be years ago. I mean, everybody's just tuned in for a few minutes to catch a song, and then they move on to the next one. And there's just so much talent out there, but it's tough for anybody to break into the market or get paid anymore.
Right. Well, you know what? You told us, gave us some insight into a different time in music and in London. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for sharing some of these exciting stories with us. And I wish you all the best of luck, Nick.
Well, fantastic. Thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to share some of the past history and just to show you that London has always been rocking and continues to rock today.
Great. Thanks for the stories.